The healthcare IoT market over the next few years will be about $160 billion. So it's a significant marketplace. And we're very pleased to have Pascale here. She has been the CEO of a pharma company. She's on multiple boards. I'm looking at her bio. It's quite impressive. She has a master's in biochem. She has an MBA from INSEAD. She splits her time between here and France. So please welcome Pascale Witz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mark and Katja, for allowing me to share my passion for how tech can actually disrupt the healthcare field. And the way I'm going to present it today is that I'm going to use the diabetes market to give you context so that you can actually really figure out how big the potential is. So to put things in context, diabetes, it's a huge epidemic, 415 million people diagnosed with diabetes today, going on to 600 plus in 2040. Out of this is 45 million people today, going on to 60 million. And really what is important to know with diabetes is that it's a disease you don't die directly from type 2 diabetes. I have to say it's actually type 2 diabetes. But it's very costly, and you die from the consequences of diabetes if you don't treat it on the long run. Today, $1 in $3 of Medicare is actually used to care for people living with diabetes. And as I said, the issue with diabetes is that it can actually lead to retinopathy, kidney disease, microvascular issue. In the US alone, I don't know if you realize that, but there are 200 amputations per day that are caused by diabetes. And this is only going up. So this is really a dreadful disease. And one reason why it leads to those consequences is that it's not well managed. You have to be on drugs, on insulin, to manage it well. It's a problem where with insulin, either your body is no longer able to respond to insulin, or your body is not able to produce insulin. And insulin is the hormone that is metabolizing glucose or carbohydrate. So what it means also is that because the insulin does not metabolize carbohydrate, you have a very good biomarker. You can actually measure the level of glucose in the blood. Now, the trouble is that this level of glucose does not depend just on the individual, but it does depend on how much food you have taken, how much sleep you had, how much stress you are. Is it cold, hot? Have you exercised or not? So it is actually something that varies a lot. So how do you keep up with that? Well, here's how you keep up with it. You measure it. And this is, still 80% and maybe 85%, I don't know the exact number of people, use something that looks like this. You have to have a large toolkit. You need to prick your finger, you press your finger, you take a strip, you put your strip on your drop of blood, you take the drop of blood, the strip, and you put it in a blood glucose meter, and you read a number. And that's really the size of the tool. And then what do? You have what you call a logbook that you're going to bring to your next physician's visit. When I arrived in my last company at Sanofi, I was heading all the pharma divisions. I looked at it, and I'm a molecular biologist and an engineer by background, and I was just thinking, we spend $1 billion in R&D to develop a new drug. There must not have been a lot of money that was spent into making the measurement of glucose easier for the patients, right? Well, that's one issue. The other issue is that you measure it 3-4 times a day, but what do you measure really? You measure 4 points. The reality of the biology is that it could be anything in between. And I still remember one patient telling me, if I only knew if I was going up, when I have a number that is low, am I on an upwards trend or downward trends? Because the action is different. And then an endocrinologist was telling me, and then the issue is the logbook. The logbook, the patient, they come with their logbook, but actually half of them forget it. The other half of them have just filled it the day before, so all the data are crap. And then I have my nurses who actually spend time looking at the logbook, but they are going to spend time on the outliers. And the reality is that, and that was still I'm quoting the endocrinologist, I don't care if the patient is very well controlled and then has a few outliers. I care actually a lot more if a patient is always very close to the upper limit, because I want still to bring him down, and I don't have a good way to do it. There was a first revolution, you know. When I arrived in my last company, as I mentioned, they had actually the right idea, and they had really thought about, look, we have to get rid of those logbooks, and there is a better way to do it. Now, 2013 seems like yesterday, but it's also a long time ago, as you know, with Internet of Things. And they were very proud of having developed a blood glucose meter with an adapter, and the adapter could seamlessly connect to the iPhone. Now, as soon as they told me that, we had just transitioned from this large port of the iPhone to the small one. Before they explained what the challenge was, they were like, and you know what happened? I said, they changed the port. And so the whole product development became obsolete, unfortunately, very quickly. But the idea was there. The first real disruption came in from, that's Abbott, you see here. They launched a patch where you could have actually stick your patch on the arm, had a receiver that was the size of a smartphone that you could pass along your arm. Interestingly enough, a lot of the people who used to work on the medical and clinical side of diabetes really underestimated what it would bring. And I remember, I mean, I tend to put myself on the user side, on the consumer side, but remember, the pharmaceutical industry for a long time had in mind to serve physicians, serve pharmacies, and serve payers. The patient pretty much did take the drug that was prescribed the way it was prescribed. So really thinking about how you make it easier for the patient was not the way the industry had grown up. And here come Abbott with this tool, and actually they oversold. It took off like crazy. Was launched in 2015 in Europe. I know many people, since I split my time, who were trying to get access to it, but it was approved in 2017 in the US. The FDA process being a little bit longer for good and bad reasons, but in the end, it was launched in the US in 2017. And another company called Dexcom is solely focused on developing glucose monitor, and actually continuous glucose monitor. And really, all of this was enabled by the miniaturization, by Internet of Things, by the technology. And about the same time as Abbott, they had what you call the G4 with the same principle. They recommend to stick the sensor on the belly. It was a little bit bigger, probably half my hand and a bit thick, with a receiver, and you had some calibration. So you still had some skeptical people in the industry who were saying, yeah, you know, the type 2 diabetes, they don't want this continuous measurement. Well, numbers are proving them wrong, because, you know, when something makes your life simpler, people tend to really adopt it. And they moved on to the G5 and just launched the G6. And you can see the G6 here. It's actually very, very thin. You put it on your belly. No calibration, no transmitter, connects seamlessly to your iPhone. And now the patient I'm talking to are just telling me they have their numbers consistently. And it allows the patient to actually learn more how they react, because the patient, you know, everybody has a brain. And therefore, they can correlate the number they see with how well they have slept, how much they have eaten, etc. And it does really make their life much simpler. So this is in the course of 5 years. You can see, I mean, here I did not want, my point is not to make a competitive intelligence, but you can see what matters to the patient. No calibration, so you no longer need those finger sticks. You no longer need to carry all these tools and hide in the bathroom to make your blood glucose measurement. It gives you a trend. Am I going up? Am I going down? Some, and not all of them, but some give you an alarm for a high or a low glucose so that you can react and take the proper clinical action. It also sends the data to the iPhone, but you can also decide to share it with your caregiver, with your physician. And therefore, you can also imagine how much that opens the door for a whole new approach, which is analyzing the data. Because now that you can actually record the data seamlessly, you don't have the human error in transcribing, you can have a lot of data. And that's really what was behind the joint venture that I actually launched when I was at Sanofi with the CEO of what was then the CEO of Google Life Sciences, now called Verily. We launched this diabetes joint venture called Onduo. And the idea was really that if you want to have a patient that is managing his own disease much better, you have to think differently. When you think about the life of a patient today, I talk about measuring the glucose and injecting the insulin, but they have a lot of other things to deal with because they tend to have a lot of other comorbidities. And you need to think about how is your eye doing, your kidney, what you're eating. It's a lot of work. So we realized we had actually a vision that it happened. We realized that Verily was sharing. We realized that we had very complementary competences. Sanofi, as a pharmaceutical company, was very good at developing drugs, was very good on the medical and clinical side, knew what it takes to launch a new medical medicine, a new medical treatment. And we had gone into defining the vision and the strategy to take a more holistic approach, an integrated care approach. But we were going to look at different partnerships to have the whole solution. And it came out that actually Verily had the capability to do miniaturization, to connect and transmit the data, and to analyze them. So on the basis of that idea, we just decided to set up a joint venture and thought that if you put people who are really focused on one problem, they have to find the solution together. As I mentioned earlier, the idea was that if you want to improve the outcome of diabetes, you need to bring the patient to the right dose of insulin as quickly as you can and stay there. And you need to help them. But for this, you need to enable them to monitor the data, collect the data, share them, and do the data analysis so that you can change the intervention. I had a hard time at that time, at the beginning, to convince my colleagues that this was something we would have to do, because what happens is that you would help the patient have better outcome, but then what does it mean for a company that is selling insulin? Why is it better for me? Well, in a world where there is so much cost pressure on using drugs, everybody wants to also demonstrate that you have better outcomes. And to demonstrate that you have better outcomes, it's very hard to do if the patient is not using the right level of drug at the right moment or is dropping his treatment. So anything that helps the patient stay on treatment, very simply helps a pharma company continue to sell more drug, but also ensure that you have a better outcome. And it's also important for a pharma company, when you launch a new product, you don't want people to say, well, it doesn't work, when actually the reality is that the patient doesn't take it. And it does happen more often than you think. So this actually is something that occurred over the course of just a few years. Once we launched the joint venture with Verily in 2016, it was in February 2016, the competitors were not really interested and were only very slowly moving. Since then, I'm not going to go into the details, but the biggest competitor of Sanofi, Novo and Lilly, have done a bunch of partnerships. Novo has just launched a connected pen with the same idea of being able to record what has been used as a dose of insulin, and the same idea of being able to manage the patients, to manage the disease for the patients. So what I wanted to leave you with in terms of ideas that what were the triggers for this disruption? Because people had thought about what was needed, but it was actually not possible until you had all the elements of the puzzle coming together at the same time. So the miniaturization, as long as you had a large pump, this was just for the type 1 diabetes who might die if they don't inject themselves insulin. As long as it was not small enough, people would not buy into it. The idea of continuous monitoring, people did not think you would do it because, again, it sounded like being heavily sick, whereas you can make it seamless. Then interoperability, being able to capture raw data from different areas, really made people think differently about the disease and the ability to analyze a large set of data. So that's really what pushed and disrupted the market in diabetes. If you think more broadly now, all this healthcare disruption, because you have the ability to record so many data continuously rather than in a discrete fashion, you can actually think about a lot of areas where you can completely change the management of disease. So the short-term, chronic disease and patient engagement. Enabling the patient to better understand what is happening to him is making a huge difference. It's true in diabetes. If I have time, I'll go quickly through asthma. It can also help you bring a new understanding of disease that we didn't have before because we did not record the data. The reality is that we don't have a lot of information. You know, you send a jet in the air, you record a lot of data, and you know when a part is going to break before it breaks. Not talking into Boeing here, but usually this is how it works. And it opens up a whole new path for research. A quick example, I mentioned, what I mentioned with diabetes. Propeller Health is a company that had developed an inhaler for asthma product. For years, they were trying to value the company, increase the value, and they were struggling because it was highly competitive. One day, they decided to change course. They had a connected inhaler. They decided to focus on the connecting piece and actually develop a whole digital health plan. And that digital health plan is really what enabled to unlock the value. This is taken from their website. Their connected piece connects to a variety of different inhalers. And they also developed the clinical studies that shows that you have 80% less asthma attacks. You drive a lot more adherence, up to 50% more doses taken on schedule. And they showed, you have it at the bottom of this page, this is the improvement. You have 50% more asthma control. You have much less flares that bring the patient to the ER, and therefore it's much less costly. So a lot of plans actually have decided that they will pay for the plan because it helps the patient better manage their disease. And that's actually how you show the business model. You demonstrate that you have better outcome, lower cost, and it helps the patient understanding their disease much better. The second example I said where there is Internet of Things can bring a lot of disruption is it can actually bring a new understanding of the disease. There are some things that you never understand if you don't record continuously because there are discrete events that can be damaging for the health, but you don't see it. So I'm a board member of Fresenius Medical Care, a leader in dialysis. And I'll go quickly, but everybody knows that the oxygenation during the dialysis is an important factor. But you look at a bunch of curves like this. Until recently, it was written on paper. You look at it and you think, that's going to be OK. I don't necessarily know what I do with it, unless it goes down for a long time. But is it a problem? Is the top left corner more of a problem than the bottom right corner? So what Fresenius decided to do is that have a sensor that could actually record, and I'm sorry, some of this you can't see, but the point is really that they went to measure 150 times per second, which means 9,000 measurements by minutes. But they have the whole infrastructure to analyze an enormous amount of data that came out of all these patients that they are treating. And they analyzed more than 1,000 patients over 4 years, which means more than 30,000 treatments. They changed their decision tree on what the medical decision to take. And by changing their decision tree on certain patients, for a certain subset of the patient population, they were able to decrease the mortality by 30%, which is huge. I mean, now realize those patients are end stage. I mean, the people who are under dialysis, the mortality rate is quite high. But decreasing it for any subset of patient population by 30% tells you how disruptive the ability to measure continuously a high number of parameters is enormous. So, transforming pharma R&D. Mark has to invite me again because it would be another whole keynote speech. So next year or the year after, it's still it's in infancy. But what you have to know is that in pharmaceutical drug development, when you go into phase 3, you don't measure a lot of things because if you measure things that you can't explain, then it becomes an issue. So I do think that this is going to be an enormous disruption in the field as well. As a board member, we always push the leadership to develop competence and capabilities, not only internally, because the first example I showed that developing this port on the iPhone is the result of people developing it without having the expertise of developing a device. But really acquiring competencies on the field and making sure that you bring in external competency. Pushing people in the companies to be ready for disruption, studying what is happening in other industries. In healthcare, everybody tends to say, yeah, but we are different, right? I mean, the bar is so much higher and the things are so much different in healthcare that it's not going to touch us in the same way. That's BS. It is a little bit slower because the regulation and the approval are a bit more challenging, and for good reasons. As a patient, I want to make sure that you don't use anything for me that is going to be detrimental to my health. There's very often questions about in-house versus acquire or integration, and the joint venture that Sanofi has done with Google is a good example that trying to do everything internally was not possible. Partnering with a lot of different players was possible, but actually was also risky because we would have had to develop a lot more expertise in every field. And having an integrated approach was helpful, but actually a networked integrated approach is for me what works the best. You also need frequently to have what I call a pull, which is some people want to go saying, oh, well, the board and the leadership wants to go digital, go Internet of Things, so we'll go there. And sometimes you have to remind them, hey, but what's your purpose? What's your goal? How are you going to make money? And you have to think about it because it's all great, but the healthcare ecosystem is actually quite complicated, and a great idea does not necessarily make a great business. And particularly in the US, where the healthcare system is highly fragmented, understanding how each stakeholder is reacting to any change is important if you want to develop a business model, thinking about reimbursement being key. And then as a business leader, a lot of that applies too, but I would say with a lot more focus on how do you make money? I mean, it's all great to use all this technology. It is very disruptive, but how do you make money? Who is making money? A lot of time people will tell me, well, it is better outcome, therefore it's good. Yeah, it's a better outcome, but if nobody's paying for it, nobody's going to buy it. So how do you develop this? How do you grow and scale up? There are thousands and thousands of great pilots in the US particularly, where it works in one hospital, one network, one county, one city. But as soon as you want to scale up, you actually reach some challenges. So it might still be a good idea, but how do you think about it? How do you protect your new business model from the competition? That's also a challenge that you can face. Cannibalization of existing revenue is a key one. For example, this joint venture with this Ondur joint venture, you might actually have an argument that if it works really well, you can challenge the existing business model of selling drugs. Yeah, but I mean, we are in medicine because we want to improve the health of the patients. And I always have the argument that actually, if something is going to work better than what you have today, somebody is going to do it. So you better understand it yourself, understand how you disrupt yourself before somebody else disrupts you. But you don't want to do it before, you don't want to do it early, because then you shoot yourself in the foot. The defensive versus the offensive model is a very important one. And I had somewhere, maybe I missed it, but this integrated approach. Think about the iPod without the iTunes when they launched iPod. This is also very important. So developing any small bit of a solution to make the patient's life easier only works if the life of the patient is easier at the end. If it's only a step towards it, nobody's going to pay for it. So with that, I hope that I have opened for you some ideas of how you can actually activate your brain toward developing even more technology for improving health outcome. And I'm happy to take questions.
Well, nicely done. Nicely done. We have a unique opportunity at Connected Things to mash two leaders without any preparation together. So as you were talking, I was thinking a little bit about Bill's chat earlier, which I know you saw. He purports to be the king of all things. Fair enough?
And I'm the queen of health.
And you're okay. So the king and the queen. So the question would be, and maybe it's, I'm not sure who it's to yet, but why wouldn't you have diabetes monitoring or other chronic disease monitoring working very closely with something that's in every single home? Because right now, it's you, as you described, you're going to the iPhone, you're going,
Yeah, I mean, why not? First of all, I do think that a lot of these initiatives are going to converge at some point. So I don't see that as either or. I was actually very interested in what Bill was showing because there are a lot of other things that you can think of. For example, this morning he was talking about Alexa in the home. There are some early stage startups that are working on mental health issues by capturing the voice and the movements in the house. So I think this is a good example where this is converging. For diabetes, I think this was an example where there is really truly something where the sensors and miniaturization made it actually so important today to move further. But I do think it's going to expand to cardiovascular, for example. All those sensors, a lot of the medical community still sees the Apple Watch and those things as just a fitness type of technology.
It's wellness versus health.
Yes, but I actually feel that actually there is a convergence, first of all. I think that actually the fact that there is a business case for the wellness enables the technology to improve and slowly will be good enough that it will be tested in clinical trials and therefore become part of the medical tools that people use. And that is going to be only growing of importance because I think I said it at the beginning, but I will reinforce it. Chronic diseases are really increasing because medicine has done a great job treating the acute disease. People don't die as much as they used to from cardiovascular, from cancer, and a bunch of other diseases. But they live much longer, but with a lot of comorbidities, diabetes, cardiovascular, asthma, autoimmune disease. So you're dealing with people who are in good health, except a few conditions that they have to manage. And it's going to be way too costly for the health system if you do not help those patients to anticipate and adjust their lifestyle to improve their own health.
That makes sense. I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot. We haven't talked about this, so you can say pass.
Well, I mean, there's two. First of all, healthcare scares me.
From a liability standpoint?
No, from the privacy standpoint. There's nothing more personal than an alert that tells you
your blood sugar is low or whatever.
Like that, right? That's not necessarily something you strive to share. On the other hand, if you look at reinforcing behavior, the TV is a great place to try to help reinforce behavior based on notifications, and to the extent that it could fulfill that while also not being a privacy issue. I think that's a great use case. Also, replenishment of supplies. Where you have the ability to predict when they need new supplies, and you could facilitate that transactionally very easy with voice or on the TV. Makes a lot of sense. And then just viewing your pattern on a TV screen where other people might have an interest, your spouse or somebody, and you want to go look at your chart for the day or whatever, see how the medication's working. I think those are all interesting use cases, and I think those will converge because, just as the laptop is, morphing in itself, in many ways, the TV will morph to provide more informatic type use cases, maybe in that domain as well.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for taking an unprepared question. So it's Q&A time, and our volunteers will be facilitating with the mic. We have a few minutes to do that.
What do you think the time frame is for integration of AI in helping people as they're monitoring begin to proactively manage their health?
I mean, yeah, there are several startups that are working on using AI to identify a certain pattern. Probably more on the mental health side, to just understand what's the pattern that would lead to mood disorders. I mean, I'm thinking mood disorders, depression, schizophrenia, and things like that. But I'm tempted to say as well that it has started. If you think about how AI can be used in oncology, for example. You know, there are several companies that are starting to use AI to diagnose or to develop some diagnostics for oncology. So it's at the very beginning. How much time? Hard to say, honestly. I don't think it's going to be an on-off type of answer. You know, it's going to be gradual. There is going to be more and more that is going to be used. And in 5 years, a little bit like here, we will look back and say, how did we do it before?
The healthcare sector has been like a huge target for like ransomware attacks. Now we have all these newer IoT devices, and my concern is that they're not going to be frequently updated. And so I just want to hear your opinion on your concerns with that.
First of all, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but yes, it's interesting that patients really worry about their data to be sent. Now, a lot of these tools, you can decide to have them just local. You know, the fact that it can help you manage your own disease, I think is helpful. You can decide to share or not to share. Now, generally speaking, I think, like everything, the awareness of the patient in updating their software and keeping up to this is going to be huge. And yes, I mean, everybody who develops those tools has to pay specific attention to cybersecurity.